Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Make sure to like and subscribe and join the Discord if you want. Today we are going to be doing what if Deku was a vigilante. Poltergeist and Ifrit are a duo of vigilantes operating mainly at night in Musutafu. People and heroes alike wonder who these kids are who one night simply started fighting criminals while throwing off every cop who could even get close. Aizawa Shouta, pro Hero Eraserhead, has taken it into his hands to find out who these children are and also to keep them safe. Midroriya Izuku wanted more than anything in life to be a hero. But after discovering that his abusive father is also the serial killer who killed his mother, he runs away from home and ends up on the street. Well, this situation puts a wrench in his plans. However, he ends up developing a quirk due to a life and death situation. He may not be able to become a pro hero anymore, but he says that is the only way to be a hero. He will fight crime and save people, even if his methods are not exactly legal. Disclaimer. There may be mature content and maybe 18 plus. With that stuff out of the way, let's begin chapter 1. Chapter text. Izuku's life has been horrible for a long time. When he was 4, a doctor declared him quirkless, based exclusively on an extra toe joint. A research that has been outdated for more than a century. But who cares? He was declared quirkless, so he's useless. His best friend became his worst bully. Everyone turned his back to him. The teachers said they were there to hear and help him. But they lied because that's what they always do. They never cared for him, only for the kids with powerful quirks. Not even his mother, as much as she loved him, did not believe in his dream of being a hero. For an entire year, Izuku became the class's training dummy for quirks. Many would think his life couldn't get worse. Well, think again. Because the next year, exactly on his birthday, another tragedy hit him. This time taking from him the only person that still loved him. After another bad day, upon entering his home, Izuku was greeted by the vision of his dead mother, sitting on a chair right in front of the door. Face burned, and eyes missing. It was such a horrible sight, that Izuku couldn't even scream. He instantly went into shock. The only reason it didn't take days for the body to be found was that Mitsuki came to visit. Izuku stayed unresponsive for a few weeks. The culprit was never found by the police. Inko wasn't the first victim of this particular assassin. The media called him Eyeburner. A stupid name if you asked Izuku, but again, he couldn't even answer you at the moment. After that, Izuku has to move in with his father. Izuku was pulled out of school under the pretense of being homeschooled. As if the world, or some higher being, enjoyed torturing him, and maybe it really does, this was even worse. His father, if he could even be called that, would mercilessly beat him in every possible chance he had. Slaps, fists, kicks, bottles, even the eyes, and his fire breath quirk. Anything that could be used to hurt Izuku was used. Some days more than once. The only care Hisashi has ever shown is not to kill him. That went for an entire year, until the day that his father, after leaving to work, he never said what his job was, left a paper behind. The paper was a list of names and dates, carefully organized in chronological order. And a single name in the list almost made his heart stop. Midoriya Izuku 15 July. It was his mom's death date. Immediately, praying to be wrong, Izuku went to his dad's PC and searched for the other names on the list. All of them were dead. Murdered on the exact day on the list and in the same way as his mother. A single line caught Izuku's attention. Presumed cause of death, burning. The eyes were probably removed while the victim was still alive. This raised too many red flags on Izuku's head. For as much as he's only a child, he's a clever child. And his father certainly isn't a good man. Looking to the side, Izuku saw a closed door. One that his father absolutely forbade Izuku from ever entering. But at this moment, Izuku already knows too much to be scared of this. He opened the door and found exactly what he feared finding there. Many jars, with name tags under them, and organized alphabetically. Almost like a trophy, a single jar was in the center of the room, with 2 familiar green eyeballs floating inside. And if that wasn't clear enough, the name tag said the rest. Midoriya Izuku. Those were his mother's eyes. All this time, Izuku was living with his mother's murderer. And now he knew too much. There's no way Hisashi Izuku will never call this monster his father again. Wouldn't figure out that Izuku knows, and then he will be the next victim. With this knowledge, Izuku left the house by the window. The door is always locked, and the keys are hidden, and ran as fast as he could. In his desperation to escape, he didn't pack anything. He didn't even put on his shoes. He just ran, trying to get as far away as he could. He thought of going to the police, but immediately gave up on the idea. He had no proof, and he already knew from past experiences that the police wouldn't even hear a kid, much less equip this kid. If he went to the police, he would only be sent back to Hisashi, to his own death. It's almost comical how much his life changed in only 2 years. From a happy kid to a homeless fugitive from a serial killer. And there's nothing he can do except learn to survive. His next year was torture. He did learn how to survive from trash only. Because as desperate as he was, Izuku refused to steal. But his life only got worse. More than once, he got sick. More than once, he got hurt. More than once, he broke bones. Maybe it's a good thing that Hisashi got his pain tolerance and heat resistance so high, because if not, he certainly would have died from the multiple fevers he had along the following year. But somehow, he survived to his 7th birthday. The quirkless 7-year-old kid survived alone and homeless for an entire year. Guess he's not so useless, huh? But of course, the moment he starts to get optimistic is when life will choose to remember him how cruel she was. This time, it was in the form of 2 muggers that cornered him in an alley. Because obviously, the dirty shoeless kid must have something worth robbing, right? And what could Izuku, besides crouch down and cry, while the men kicked him like Hisashi did so many times begging for them to stop, but they didn't. As the tears fell down, his mind started to go blank. He saw black on the corner of his vision. Well, guess this is where I die. I survived more than I thought I would. He felt something rising from his stomach and something at the tip of his fingers. For a moment, he lost conscience. The 2 muggers, maybe satisfied with their beating, or perhaps they realized Izuku really had nothing, started to leave. But then, Izuku got up. And when the first mugger looked at him, his expression was different, and his eyes were yellow. Izuku had an almost maniacal grin on his bloody face, and smoke was leaving his ears. "Hey, where are you going?" Izuku asked. "You guys gave me quite the beating. Isn't it fair that I return the favor?" And before anyone could reply, Izuku opened his mouth and blew a fireball at the first guy. The guy immediately started screaming as his clothes caught fire. The second one turned to Izuku, but this time, the expression he saw was the same scared kid they attacked a few moments ago, except that his eyes were blue. "Did I? How? Sorry, I didn't want to hurt you." The second one ran to Izuku, who raised his hands in front of his face, trying to protect himself from the incoming blow. But it never came. When Izuku looked up again, the man was floating in front of him, but couldn't move, like something was holding him. As this Izuku moved up his hand, and the man went up with the movement. His eyes widened. I have a quirk." He excitedly raised his arms, which launched the man in the air. Then he hit the floor with a loud thud, when Izuku checked on him. He was unconscious. "Oh, no. I'm so sorry. Calm down. This isn't the time for a panic attack. We need to leave." Izuku heard a voice, extremely like his own, saying, "What? Who said that?" Izuku asked, looking around, but there was no one in sight. "In your head, dumbass. Leave first, freak out later. The police will investigate the screaming any second now. Even if it was accidental, this was illegal quirk use. And even if they let us explain, they'll call Hisashi. So, run." The boy searched him, and as scared as Izuku was at the moment, he was even more scared of Hisashi finding him. So Izuku did as the voice said, and ran from the alley as fast as possible. "I can question my sanity later, dog." He ran for a good while, looking for somewhere to hide. Thankfully, his time with Hisashi, and on the streets made Izuku really silent. Stealth was second nature for him, so no one saw him leaving the alley. About 10 minutes later, Izuku saw the perfect hiding spot. An old bell tower, abandoned and, some say, haunted. No one has come here for years, so as long as Izuku is careful. After entering and making sure that he was indeed alone, he heard the voice again. "Well, that was something. Who are you? And why are you in my head?" Izuku asked between heavy breaths. "Midoriya Izuku, who else could I be?" The voice replied. "What? But I am Midoriya Izuku." Izuku replied indignantly. The voice simply chuckled. "No shit, Sherlock. I thought I was smarter than that." Izuku let out an indignant huff at this. "I'm very smart, okay?" Then he added lower. "Even if everyone says I'm not. Come on, Zu." Izuku looked up at the nickname. "No one calls me that since mom." He felt tears in his eyes and buried his face in his knees. "No, please, don't cry now," the voice said softly. "I'll explain what I gathered, but frankly, this is as confusing for me as it is for you." "Okay, but first, are you really new?" Izuku asked, not bothering to look up again. Because this voice obviously isn't a physical person, he can make visual contact to talk. "Yup, we both are," the voice confirmed. "I think we read about this once before. Like a split per personality." Izuku replied, struggling with the big word. "That's the word. I have a theory. The other Izuku gods, this will be confusing, confirmed. You think we can find a mirror anywhere here?" "A mirror? I doubt it. But we can probably find a water puddle. Yesterday it rained so much." Izuku replied, getting up to look around. It didn't take long to find the puddle, thankfully clean enough for them to see their reflex. "Well, this confirms part of my theory." Izuku 2 said nonchalantly while Izuku 1 watched, stunned, raising a hand to his face. "What happened to my eyes?" Izuku 1 asked, looking at his blue eyes. "Aren't they green?" "What the heck? My eyes changed color. Is this part of my quirk? A mutation? But I use telekinesis, so I am an emitter. But maybe it has to do with our splitting. If the quirk caused my mind to split, then what does that mean? Is it possible? So this is how it feels to be on the other side of my muttering." Izuku 2 interrupted Izuku's 1 thoughts. "Interesting. Izuku-1 felt a hand patting his head, and when he looked up, he saw his own right hand. What thought was easy to put 2 and 2 together. You can move my body too. Looks like I can. And look down again. Izuku-1 looked at the puddle again, and this time his right eye was yellow instead of blue. Looks like yellow is me, and blue is you. And if you mix blue and yellow, Izuku-1 started. We get green. Izuku-2 completed. This split was a little more physical than expected. Does it have anything to do with our quirk? Izuku-1 mused. I thought we were emitters, not mutation. I think we are both. Izuku-2 said. I mean, Mom was clearly an emitter, but Hisashi, I'm not so sure. He can breathe fire. This is an emission. But maybe he also had some kind of mutation. Izuku-1 nodded. We gain nothing overthinking about it now. Let's start testing. Izuku-2 said. Also, we need a way to differentiate ourselves. Izuku-1 and Izuku-2 are too confusing. Well, yeah. But anything comes to your mind. Izuku-1 replied. Let me see. Izuku-2 replied. For the next few minutes, Izuku-1 could hear the low mumbles on his head. Wow. He wasn't kidding. Being on the other side of my mutterings is really weird. I know. Izuku-2 finally exclaimed. You are Zuku. And I am Kuzu. Zuku and Kuzu. Izuku-1 asked. Really? Yup. It's perfect. We are like 2 sides of a coin. So why not just invert our names? Though I will probably keep calling you Zu. Izuku-1 thought for a few seconds. Alright. I like it. He smiled. I know we are kin to the same person. But nice to meet you, Kuzu. Likewise, Zuku. Kuzu replied, and Zuku could hear the smile in his voice. Now, how about we start testing our quirk? I thought I would never suggest it, Zuku said. Analysis time. With that, they both moved on to test their limits. Starting with the telekinesis. For starters, as they thought, his quirk was like a better version of his mother's. Pulling things towards him is much easier than moving around. And he's not limited exclusively to small objects. He did launch a grown adult in the air, after all. Also, no matter what they tried, Kuzu couldn't use the telekinesis. Whenever he was in command of the body, it was like the quirk didn't exist. Testing the other side of their quirk had the same results. Kuzu can breathe fire like Hisashi. But he can also let off fire from his nose, ears, and even his eyes. Also, his hair is fireproof. They discovered it after Kuzu ended up with a bonfire in his head for 5 minutes before realizing it, and the rest of his body was really resistant to it. Like Kuzu can't use the telekinesis, Zuku can't use fire. The first round of testing ended around sunset. And with that, they had some idea of what to expect and how to start training. They decided to stay in the bell tower for the time being. At night they talked before going to sleep. Hey Zu. Kuzu started. We have a quirk now. We really have. You think we can be a hero now? Zuku asked expectantly. Maybe. But there's Hisashi. Kuzu replied. Because, if it were discovered that Izuku is the son of a villain, they would never be able to be pro-heroes. But now, maybe we don't need to. What do you mean, Kuzu? Zuku asked again. We aren't useless anymore. We can defend ourselves, and maybe others, Kuzu replied. And we can catch Hisashi ourselves. You're saying? But that's too dangerous. You know how strong he is. I know. We can't dream of defeating him. Kuzu replied sadly. Not yet, at least. Then what? Oh. Realization finally hit Zuku. Vigilantism. You want us to be vigilantes. That's it. We'll need to train hard. Dominate this quirk. But think about it. Kuzu said excitedly. Imagine the look on his face when we catch him with Mom's quirk. When we burn his face with his own quirk. Zuku thought about it for a few minutes in complete silence. Kuzu would think he was asleep if they weren't sharing a mind, and he couldn't hear every single of Zuku's thoughts. You know what? I'm in. Zuku finally said. We can't be pro-heroes anymore. But we can still be heroes. Great. We start preparing tomorrow. We'll need many things. Kuzu said. Like what? Zuku started. Well, shoes, for starters. Kuzu pointed, and Zuku looked down to his feet. It's been an entire year since he last wore shoes. There aren't many opportunities to get this kind of thing living on the streets. Especially since his priority is food and water to survive. Some kind of mask too. We need to hide our face. I think we should focus on my telekinesis for now, Zuku said. Until we can get fireproof clothing, we need to be careful with what we have. Good idea. But for now, you should rest, Zu. Kuzu interrupted, seeing how tired Zuku was. I'll keep watch while you sleep. What about you? Zuku asked sleepily. I can sleep later. We can always take turns. Even when you're awake, I can sleep. Kuzu replied. Now, go to sleep. If something happens, I promise to wake you up. Okay? Good night, Kuzu. Zuku said and then immediately passed out from his exhaustion. With that, the body was fully in Kuzu's control. Kuzu, making sure that Zu wasn't about to wake up anytime soon, got up and started looking around. glancing one more time at the water puddle. This time both his eyes were yellow. "Don't worry, Tsu," he whispered to himself. "I'll protect you. You won't be ever alone anymore." With that, Kuzu started making his way to the highest part of the bell tower. If anyone tries to hurt Tsu again, well, they'll have to get past Kuzu first. Chapter 2. Waking up the next day was an experience unlike anything Zuku had ever had in his life. Waking up was as if he had turned on the TV to a program already playing. It was the first time he consciously left Kuzo in charge. His vision was normal, he could see through his own eyes, but his limbs moved by themselves. It's an interesting feeling, to say the least. Especially considering that he had access to all the senses in his body. Kuzo was carrying a stool to the bell tower. Where did he get this from? "Good morning, Zu." Kuzu greeted him. How did he know Zuku was awake? "Easy. We share your mind, remember? I can hear your every thought, silly. Right? Good morning, Kuzu. Where did you get that from?" Zuku asked. "From our scavenging site, obviously. So, Tagaba Beach. Makes sense. Really does. It's amazing how many things in good condition they throw on that beach." Entering the bell tower, the place was completely different from last night. There were several trinkets scattered on the floor. Zuku recognized a few things, like old pots and pans and even some clothes. "Did you take all of this from the beach?" "Wow, how long did it take?" "The entire night." Kuzu shrugged. "I went there while you were sleeping." He yawned. "Wait. How didn't I wake up with all the movement and noise?" "Well, I can't say for sure, but I have a theory," Zuku said, putting the stool down. "You know how I am controlling our body right now?" "Yeah. It's a strange feeling. Feeling my body, but not controlling it. You get used to it." Kuzu shrugged and sat down. "Anyway, while I'm controlling the body, it's like you are in another part of our mind. While you were asleep, you probably went to a deeper part of our subconscious and disconnected yourself from the external world. With practice, we probably could do this consciously too." He made a motion with his fingers. "Or some crap like that too. Who knows how our brain really works?" "You think you could wake me up if something happened?" Zuku asked. "Probably. Anyway, I left the heavy things to bring here later. We'll need your telekinesis for that." Kuzu yawned again. "You should sleep too. If what you said is true, then I can do my things while you sleep too. You read my mind, Tsu." "Literally." They giggled together. "But first, you should start training," Kuzu said. "Do you have anything in mind?" Zuku asked. "It's pretty simple. Can you try using your quirk on yourself? Like, lifting yourself in the air?" Noticing that he was in command of the body again, Zuku closed his eyes and tried grasping the feeling he had yesterday when he used his quirk. When he felt it in his hands, he tried to direct it to his own body and raised his arms. It took a few minutes, but he felt his feet leaving the floor. "It worked," he said excitedly. "I did it. Great job, Tsu," Kuzu praised. "We can test other things later. But for now, you need to get familiar with the feeling. So let's try like this. For the rest of the day, you only move yourself with your quirk. No walking until I wake up, okay?" Zuku could see how this would help with his quirk. It made sense for him. It would also help him measure his limits. How long can he keep his quirk active? "Alright, let's do this." Zuku nodded. "Now, sleep well, Kuzu." "Thanks. See you later." A few seconds later, Zuku felt as if something had switched off inside his mind. Before, even if he was quiet, he knew Kuzu was there. And just the same, he knew that at the moment, he wasn't. What a strange feeling. We will have to look into this in the future. Zuku mused to himself. He never thought before to make an entry for himself in his hero analysis notebook. But now that he has a quirk, it is a good idea to analyze it too. The problem now is to get a notebook for it. But this is a problem to think about in the future. For now, Zuku will start practicing moving around with his quirk. If he gets good on this, maybe he could really fly in the future. That would be so cool. Along with his training, he notices a few things. It's not that he needs to use his hands to move things, but it's easier if he uses them, kinda like the wizards in the movie he used to watch. They didn't need a wand to use magic, but it made it easier to concentrate. However, if he wants to rely on his quirk for locomotion, he will need to practice it without using his arms. He practiced moving around the whole day, and by the time he felt Kuzu waking up, he was starting to feel the first drawbacks of overusing his quirk, headaches. It's only a little pain at the moment, but if he keeps pushing, it will probably turn into a migraine soon. Another thing he finally noticed when Kuzu woke up was how hungry he was. He was so concentrated on his training, that he didn't even hear his tummy growling like a wild animal. Kuzu laughed when he noticed and spent the next half an hour making fun of him for it. "Talk about a one-track mind," he said. "We are impossible." But eventually, he settled down. Unfortunately, food was still a problem for them. After all, food is probably the one thing they won't find on the beach, which severely limits their options. Even if they are about to turn into vigilantes, they still don't want to be criminals. Stealing is not an option for them. "Well, lucky us. There's a temporary solution," Kuzu said. Today and tomorrow, a charity group will be distributing food to the homeless. The group that we fit into, whether we like it or not. Come on, just try not to draw attention to ourselves. If someone starts asking questions, it will be problematic. Leave it to me, Kuzu said confidently. Alright, the body is yours, Izuku said, and just like that, he was again in the passenger seat, watching as his body moved. Though he has to hand it down to Kuzu, he moved with a confidence that Izuku never knew was possible for him. Confidence and Midoriya Izuku were two things that seemed like water and oil, but Kuzu proved that he had it on him. Like they say, no one will question if you act like you belong here. And Kuzu acted just like that. In less than an hour, Izuku had a warm soup plate in their hands. As Izuku started to eat, they had to hold down their tears because this was the best thing they had eaten in more than a year. After eating, they silently went back to their base. They'll probably stay there for a good while. Since Izuku had already overused his quirk for the day, they decided to leave the heavy lifting for tomorrow. They went to the beach and a few other things from there. Ironically enough, clothes were something relatively common to find there. Especially kids' clothing. It's probably because kids grow up quickly. Most of them were in a pretty good state. He also found a good pair of red sneakers that fit him, finally. Leaving aside all the garbage there. There are plenty of things that they could sell to the recycling center, so they can at least get some money. It's not much, but for now, at least it's a plan. They returned to base after mentally separating things into trash, usable, and recyclable. That night, they both end up sleeping at the same time. Although they can rest their minds separately, they still share the same body. It is impossible to escape physical exhaustion. Since they want to keep their base a secret, they choose to go to the beach only in the morning or night. So the next day, while waiting for sunset, they start testing with Kuzu's quirk. They want to use Zuku's telekinesis to bring heavier things to their base, so Zuku won't use his quirk until night. This will also be an excellent opportunity to see how his quirk works on bigger and heavier things. As for Kuzu, his quirk is kinda straightforward. He can breathe fire like Hisashi, but there's more. Apparently, he can create fire from any part of his body, but any part that's not his mouth, nose, ears, or eyes lacks a way to thrust the fire in a burst. So he can set his hands on fire, but he cannot shoot the flames. This does not mean that it is useless, far from it. As soon as Zuku saw the fire, he began one of his muttering sessions. The flames cannot be thrown by his hands, but he can set fire to any part of the body. Perhaps he can use this in conjunction with punches and kicks to add destructive power. In conjunction with the fire breathing would make him an excellent mid-range fighter. Also, he can set his hair on fire, his whole head actually, which would be great for intimidation. Could he control the temperature? What if I use my telekinesis to control the flames? Are we completely immune to fire, or do we still get burned if it gets too hot? This must be the longest muttering session that no one interrupted. But Kuzu was just as excited as Zuku to test these theories, so of course, he wouldn't interrupt. The first thing he concentrates on is the heat. He thinks about the hottest thing he could. And immediately, he remembers a certain blonde with spiked hair and explosions. Despite not being his intention, he gets a bit angry at the memory. Wow, look, Kuzu. Zuku calls him, and when Kuzu looks at his hand, the flame had a green color. It didn't hurt him, but Kuzu could see it was hotter than usual. Then the fire went back to the normal color. What did you do? I thought about hot things. And Katsuki came to my mind. Kuzu had to explain, because although they share thoughts, they need to pay attention to hear them, and Zuku was muttering until a few seconds ago. It made me angry. So maybe it's related to your emotions. Zuku mused. Let's try again. This time Kuzu thought back to his old school, all the kids ridiculing him for being quirkless, many physically beating him up, and the teachers standing there doing nothing, some even humiliating him too. His anger this time was obvious, and his yellowish flames almost turning red reflected this. I guess you're right, Zu. Kuzu said, looking mesmerized at the flames in his hand. It still didn't burn him, but he was starting to feel it. If he holds it for too long, he'll probably get some first-degree burns. But how farther could it go? Unconsciously, Kuzu thought of Hisashi. When that came to his memory, the vision of his dead mother in that chair, and her eyes floating in that pot. Kuzu, stop. He heard Zuku calling him, almost crying. When he looked down, the flames in his hands were bright blue, but it was flickering into a deep purple color. It's hurting. Hearing this made his anger instantly disappear and be replaced by concern. Shit. As soon as the flame returned to normal, he shook his hand, putting out the fire. Zu, I'm fine. Zuku said, but Kuzu could hear the tears in his words. Inspecting his hands, they were burned, not too unlike Hisashi's burns. This was at least a second-degree burn. Zuku's tears were probably more related to the memory than pain. Still, Kuzu felt bad for causing it. The silver lining is that he was testing the fire in his left hand, so they didn't hurt their main hand. Sorry Zu, Kuzu said. Okay. Blue flames and higher are too much for us. Zuku said after calming down. Let's try to keep the anger in check. It will be best. Kuzu agreed. After that, they tore up one of the clean clothes they managed to get and used it to wrap the wound. They did some more tests on the Quirk, but most of them will have to be left for when they can try somewhere where they won't cause a fire in the entire quarter. After they get anything useful, they could probably use the beach for that. When the sun finally set, they went to the beach and started to work. As it turns out, Izuku's telekinesis is strong enough to lift most of the furniture on the beach, but not too many things at once. They'll have to train more for that. They carry an old but still good coach, a mattress, cabinets. They also get an old stove that looks like it can be repaired, among other things. It takes them a few trips to carry everything, but by the end of it all, the place is finally starting to feel like home. Izuku feels a kind of pride thinking about it. Maybe things are finally starting to look up for them. During the following weeks, they focus on various things. For starters, Izuku wants to keep studying. It is not too difficult to find a library with internet access where he could study online. The hard part was convincing the person in charge of the library why an 8-year-old child was going to the library alone. Kuzu tells a rehearsed sob story about how Izuku lost his parents in a villain attack. Partially true, thank you very much, and Izuku was sent to foster care. However, his caretakers were horrible and abusive, so he ran away, but he still wanted to continue studying. By the end of the story, the librarian, a kind middle-aged lady, was crying fat tears. She ended up offering Izuku a part-time job. In exchange for helping her keep the library clean and organized, she got Izuku a library card and permission to use the library as much as he wanted. She always had a snack ready for him and paid for his help. It's clearly an excuse for her to help Izuku. Frankly, if she thought he would accept, she would probably offer to foster him, but she never brought it up, thankfully. It worked out much better than they were expecting, and despite the guilt Izuku felt for deceiving the kind librarian, everything worked out in the end. From there, Izuku quickly finds free online classes to continue his education. It is not the most renowned online school, but Aldera was nothing great either. The second thing they focus on is training their body. This one is handled by Kuzu. Since they share a mind, anything that one of them learns, both can use. With training, they learn to use their hands ambidextrously, so they could do 2 separate things simultaneously. This makes them really good at multitasking. For them, a pretty normal thing is Kuzu working out with a book, notebook, and pens floating in front of his face, while Zuku studies. And last but not least, training their quirks. Because as serious as they are about being vigilantes, they are not idiots. To try to fight with a newly acquired quirk is to ask for death, either from them or from others. It is only a few months later, with an improvised disguise, a skull mask that they bought cheaply at a costume store, and a lot of nervousness, that they go out on their first patrol. Chapter 3 It was a simple patrol night, nothing weird. It was strangely peaceful, to be honest, but it's not like he never had calm nights. Maybe I can finish earlier today, and go home take a nap. But then he got a call from Tsukauchi. Spoke too soon. Sighing, he answered the call, not that he didn't know what it was about. Tsukauchi only calls for 2 things. So either everyone is dying or Eraserhead. It's them again. Yup, just as he thought. Where it is this time? And how many? Shouta asked calmly. I'm sending the location. It's about 5 minutes from where you are. Tsukauchi replied, and a few seconds later, he received the location. 7 muggers, all tied in chains and hanging from the wall, no burnings this time. Well, what do you know? On my way. With that, Shouta hung up the call and started running. Poltergeist and Ifrit. A famous vigilante duo from these parts that Shouta is infuriatingly familiar with. They appeared about a year ago and started simply by stopping petty thieves and the like. But then, with the experience, they started building their confidence. And with confidence, they started going after bigger fish. They still don't try going after full-fledged villains, but something tells Shouta this will change soon. Barely 5 minutes after starting running, Shouta saw the scene. Just as Tsukauchi said, 7 men hanging on the wall chained, no signal of burning either in the walls nor the men. So this time, it was only Poltergeist. Ignoring the thieves calling for help, Shouta instead took off and started running. With luck, he'll still be able to catch up with him before he disappears again. It's only been a few weeks that Shouta started investigating the duo, but he has yet to see one of them in person. They're slippery. And it is by pure chance that he finds them. About 10 minutes following the direction the vigilante was last seen, Shouta literally bumped into him. The only thing he sees is a white cloak and a skull mask. Then immediately, he activates Erasure and sends his capture skull. Trapping each hand on the fabric, he feels nothing when he goes to the feet. Looking closely, Shouta sees the truth. The vigilante uses the cloak to disguise his actual height, floating with his quirk under to seem bigger. Clever, and worrisome too. Because looking at his actual height, this kid is even younger than he expected. To his credit, the vigilante doesn't panic. He simply looks at Shouta's red glowing eyes and floating hair. Under the cloak and the mask, Shouta sees a pair of blue eyes. Did you disable my quirk? A voice, too young to be there, asked. That's a really cool quirk. Erasure. Shouta said simply. How old are you, kid? I'm 8, Shouta tried his best to keep his face neutral with this response. Eraserhead, right? Since you're holding me like a criminal, I suppose you know who I am, right? The kid said, still too calm about the situation. Poltergeist. Shouta replied. A vigilante. Yeah, thought so. Poltergeist replied. The mask was hiding his expression, but Shouta had the feeling that he was smiling. Any way to convince you to let me go? Kid, you shouldn't be there. Shouta tried arguing. Is the other one as young as you? At this, the kid closed his eyes. He's asking about you, Ifrit. The kid said, looking above Shouta's shoulder. Shouta looked over his shoulder, surprised, but there was no one there. When he turned back to the kid, he saw a red glow coming from his throat, and only had the time to let him go before a flame burst came from the kid's mouth. Sorry, Eraser said, but we need to go. The kid replied, but his posture was completely different from a moment ago. Shouta tried activating Eraser again, but the kid took off his cloak and shoved it on Shouta's face before running away. When Shouta freed himself from the fabric, the only trail the kid left was a burning skull mask on the floor. The kid probably flew away. Shouta could catch him if he wanted. But with a kid this young, this will be a bad idea. Frankly, if a kid this young felt that the only way to bring justice was by doing it himself, well, society, heroes, and authorities must have failed him too much already. This case just went from slightly troublesome to a complete headache. But after this night, there's no way Shouta will let anyone else take over this case. On the other hand, Shouta caught Poltergeist, the first vigilante, who was supposed to have a telekinesis quirk. But then, he breathed fire on Shouta's face, and before he shoved his cloak on Shouta's face, Shouta is sure he saw yellow eyes behind the kid's mask, but the kid's eyes were blue. His posture was also completely different. There's also what the kid said. We need to go. He said we not I like there was more than one person. Looks like they are looking at this case from the wrong angle. Maybe Ifrit and Poltergeist are the same person after all. People with dual quirks are not something unheard of. But why the distinction? Looking at the cloak on his hand, Shouta quickly recognized it. It belonged to an arsonist that was caught a few weeks ago. Every witness said that the man used a cloak like that, but he wasn't wearing it when he was caught. The one who caught the incendiary was Ifrit. It seems he decided to keep the cloak as a souvenir. The cloak is fireproof. The fact that Poltergeist was wearing a fireproof cape further reinforces that the two are the same. But still, Shouta will have to further investigate it. And maybe he could give the cloak back to the kid. It's not like he had any use to a fireproof cloak. As they flew away from the pro hero, Izuku made sure to take as many detours as he could before going back home, just to make sure they weren't being followed. But as soon as they were certain they weren't, Kuzu started complaining. Damn it, I love that cloak. He started saying. Who was at home? I never heard of a pro hero like him. He must be underground. It's pretty hard to find info on them after all. Izuku chimed in. You must be right. Kuzu relented. But where will I get another fireproof cloak now? Maybe he'll give it back to us. Izuku tried. Why would he do that? Kuzu replied. If we see him again, I doubt we'll escape as easily. I don't know, Kuzu. I think he let us go today. It sure is weird. Kuzu sighed. If he wanted to catch us, I'm sure he could. But why not? He seemed quite surprised when I said my age. Izuku mused. Maybe he didn't want to arrest a kid. It must be the case. Kuzu replied. What else could be? He wants to help us. A few seconds of silence stretched, then they started laughing. Fat chance. Izuku said, trying to control his laughter. An adult wanting to help us, you're comedian Kuzu. I know, right? Kuzu was in no better situation. The moment he finds who we really are, we end up either in foster care, Tartarus, or worst of all, back to Hisashi. If he wants to try to gain our trust, good luck for him. Izuku said, sobering from his laugh. But until we stop Hisashi, there's no way we'll stop. You said it, Zu. Kuzu replied. If they want to stop us, it's better to bring All Might or Endeavor. I wouldn't be opposed to kicking Endeavor in the face, though. Izuku mused. Now you're talking. Kuzu replied. Anyway, we should probably skip our next patrols. At least until we can get a hold of who is this hero. Something tells me we'll be seeing him again. Izuku explained. No. Kuzu whined. It was my turn to patrol. Don't be such a baby. I'll let you have the two next ones. Izuku tried to appease him. But I want to go. You're such a battle junkie, Kuzu. Izuku shook his head. How about I let you choose the dinner today? Did that guy really pay what he promised? Kuzu asked. To the last yen. Izuku replied. The good thing about making their name is that people stopped underestimating them based on their age. After getting famous as Poltergeist, Izuku started doing the occasional job here and there, usually using his analysis skills. Of course, he makes sure he's not working for villains. Usually, he helps some other vigilante or the like with analyzing villains. They pay well enough for them to live in peace at least. Not having to pay rent surely helps. Alright, then let's eat katsu. Kuzu cheered. Why am I not surprised? Izuku teased. Because you would suggest the same. Kuzu teased back. I'm you, remember? Yeah, you said it. Izuku waves him off. Let's go then. Yay. Kuzu cheered as they left the building. With that, they quickly left their home base and went to eat. They can work on identifying the pro hero tomorrow. It takes another week until Shouta runs into the little vigilante again. This time he was looking for them. From what Tsukauchi said before, they take turns patrolling every day. Which means that each one patrol every other day. But after their first meeting, the vigilante vanished for a week, maybe to look for information about Shouta. They know his hero name is Quirk. There's not much else on the internet about him, though. It's really hard to find information on underground heroes, after all, as it should be. But this night, it's actually pretty easy to find him, almost as if the kid wanted to be found. Which, considering the note that literally said, "Keep your eyes up," Eraserhead, that one of the unconscious thugs that Ifrit defeated earlier had, is probably, in fact, what they wanted. And well, Shouta indeed found them when he was looking up. Specifically, he saw a burning hand waving at him from up a building right after he stopped him looking. When Shouta climbed up the building, he saw the kid sitting down on the edge of the building swinging his feet. "Hey, Eraser-san." The kid waved at him. Shouta saw a long chain wrapped around each of his arms. Probably used in conjunction with Poltergeist's telekinesis, functioning similarly to Shouta's capture scarf. "Good to see you. Would you kindly give me back my cloak? I like that cloak." Shouta simply shrugged and threw the cloak to the kid. The kid took it, then looked confused to Shouta. "It looks like this isn't what he was expecting. Answer one question in return." Shouta said to the kid that was carefully inspecting the cloak. "I didn't put any tracker on it, don't worry." "Alright," the kid said, staring at Shouta suspiciously. "Shoot. Ifrit and Poltergeist. Are you both?" Shouta asked. "What do you think?" The kid raised his left hand, and the chains started to dance around. Then he raised his right hand, and a flame appeared on it. Looking at the kid's eyes, one eye was blue, and the other yellow. It was different from what Shouta saw last time. But then, the chains stopped, and his eyes were both yellow again. Shouta had a good idea of what this was about, but he still wanted to confirm it. "Is this the part where you arrest me? Or does it come later?" the kid asked him. "I'm not arresting you, kid," Shouta replied. "Can I talk to the other one?" "Wow. A single hint, and you caught everything," the kid said, laughing. "Not today, Eraser-san. But if you don't want to arrest me, I'm taking my leave." Having said that, the kid simply jumped off the roof. Shouta ran to the border and looked down, but the kid was nowhere to be seen. Still, this was far from a failure for Shouta. He at least got a few things from the kid. Ifrit and Poltergeist are, in fact, the same person. The kid must have split personality. They're aware of each other and can probably talk among themselves. And each personality has one quirk. Or maybe they have one quirk, and each personality has access to half of it. The point is, the kid has two personalities, and they are both vigilantes. It seems like their eyes change color based on which one controls the body, and they can share the control, if the heterochromia is anything to go by. Comparing this encounter with the last one, Poltergeist will probably be easier to talk to. But it seems like Ifrit is really protective of his brother. Gaining their trust won't be easy, but that has never stopped Shouta before. Chapter 4 That night on the rooftop was far from the last time Shouta saw the kid. At least once a week, Shouta would meet the kid on the same rooftop. At first, it was only Ifrit that talked to him. But after a few months and a bit of bribery, Shouta soon discovered that food worked wonders. With this kid, Ifrit finally relaxed enough to let Shouta talk with Poltergeist. The first time they really talked, Shouta was surprised. The kid was as enthusiastic as he was shy. He asked at least 20 questions about Shouta's quirk in less than a minute, and Shouta struggled to answer all of them in the end. But Shouta could easily see how smart Poltergeist is. They talked a few more times, but Shouta still didn't make too much progress with them. They always dodge any question regarding themselves, and Shouta doesn't want to try pushing them for answers either. Only a year later, Shouta would learn something new about the kids. They were sitting in their usual place, Poltergeist happily munching a sandwich Shouta brought for him, when the kid shared something with Shouta. It started with a simple question. "Eraserhead-san?" the kid asked tentatively. Shouta already told them his name, but Poltergeist is too polite not to use his hero name, and Ifrit is too much of a brat to use it. "Yes?" Shouta replied, giving him his full attention. "You have," the kid started but stopped himself. He seemed to discuss with himself, or maybe with Ifrit, if he should make the question. A few seconds later, he looked at Shouta again, and he had one eye of each color, which meant that they were sharing the control body. They only did that when they were fighting or wanted to both take part in a talk. "Eye burner," he continued. His curt tone made it clear that this was Ifrit talking. "Do you know anything about it?" At that, Shouta raised an eyebrow. "I'm not giving you information on such a dangerous villain, kid," Shouta replied. "Believe me, Eraserhead," Ifrit replied. "We know how dangerous that monster is. We aren't asking what you know," Poltergeist said right after. "Only if you know something." Frankly, Shouta didn't know much. Shouta leads this case too, but finding anything on the villain is almost impossible. The villain usually attacks once every month. His victims are people of any age, gender, or ethnicity. The only similarity between them is that they all had green eyes. He probably has a fire quirk since he burns his victims' faces after he has taken out their eyes, but while they are still alive. From his MO, he likely keeps the eyes that he plucks out as trophies. But that's all, they have no suspects. The villain is very good at covering his tracks. We don't have much. It's all that Shouta replied, but the kids still nodded at him. Shouta noticed him clenching his fists. We know we can't catch him yet. Ifrit started saying. As much as I hate to admit it, he's too much for us. But he killed Mom. Poltergeist continued. And for that, we can't forgive him. He also hurts you. Ifrit let the nickname escape, but Shouta didn't comment on it. For that, I can't forgive him. Then he turned to Shouta. Do you think you can catch him in 1 year? 1 year? Shouta asked. In 1 year, on our 10th birthday. If he hasn't been caught yet, then we will act. Poltergeist, or Zoo, as Ifrit just called him, explained. We decided that when we started acting as vigilantes. And they are completely serious about this. I will try to stop you kids. Shouta started. But I hope that if it comes to it, that by then, you will trust me enough to let me help you. We'll see. Ifrit said, nodding. We need to go now. Thanks for the sandwich, Eraserhead said. Poltergeist sat down. It was delicious. Then, as they always do, they jumped down from the building. By now, Shouta doesn't even bother trying to check on them. Well, Shouta has new things to check though. The kid is the son of one of the victims of the eye burner. The villain has been active for 10 years already. This kid is 9 years old and has acted as a vigilante for at least 2 years. So this year's victims can't be the ones. But even so, he still has at least 7 years worth of victims that he needs to check. Still, if the kids want revenge, then they must have been old enough to remember their mother clearly, so it's probably been someone between 3 to 5 years ago. With the margin of error, it is best to check between 2 and 6 years. So he needs to find any women that died during this period that had a son. The kid is probably missing. He can work with that. On the way back home, Zuku couldn't help but be worried about their earlier talk. Do you think we told him too much? Maybe. But even if he somehow discovers our name, he would know Hisashi is the Eyeburner. Kuzu argued. Maybe he should. Zuku almost whispered. How many more will Hisashi kill until someone gets him? You want to trust him, don't you, Zu? Kuzu said gently, but he still felt Zuku flinching. I know we said we wouldn't trust someone that easily anymore. He started. But I can't help but hope that he's being honest. Kuzu completed it when Zuku stopped talking. You don't need to explain yourself, Zu. I know how you feel. I'm sorry, Zuku replied. You don't need to apologize either. Kuzu continued. I want to believe in him too. But we can't. Not yet. Do you have something in mind? Zuku asked. Maybe. Kuzu replied. We'll give him a chance. 1 more year. We'll know what he really wants by then. Okay. And if in the end, we can't trust him yet, then we cut all the ties. You already analyzed pretty much his whole combat style. Even if we can't defeat him, if he wants to catch us. Zuku giggled. Good luck for him. With the discussion settled, they went to sleep. This case is even more complicated than Shouta thought. Why is it so hard to locate a kid? When Shouta got home, instead of going to sleep as he would usually, he went straight to check on the files related to the Eyeburner case. He skidded through the victims in the period of time, but he found much more than he was expecting. As much as the Eyeburner attacked anyone with green eyes, most of his victims were women. Kimitashi, Hoki, Fumitaka, Koki, Midoriya, Yasukatsu, Toyokuni, Ryugo, and some others were all women who had children. Shouta went through each kid's quirk too. But none of them had a quirk that could belong to the vigilantes. Fire quirks are rare enough as it is. The combination of fire and telekinesis is even more so. Looking deeper for the parents, he found 5 possibilities. Oki had a minor fire quirk. Her fingers were basically a lighter. Toyokuni could control small fires, but couldn't create them. Ryugo could move small objects so long they weren't more than 2 meters from her. Midoriya could pull small objects in her direction. Yasukatsu could make light objects float. The mutation could make any of these quirks strong enough to be the vigilante. But none of them looked like it could be. Checking the other parent, Shouta found something interesting. Midoriya Hisashi, quirk. Fire breath, pretty self-explanatory. So the Midoriyas had a fire and a telekinesis quirk. Could it be? Shouta checked on their son. They had only one but his quirk. Well, there wasn't one. He's listed as quirkless and dead. Checking on, Shouta found something really weird. Midoriya Inko was found dead by her neighbor. Her son, Midoriya Izuku, was the first one to find the body, but at the time, 5-year-old kid went into shock when he saw her body. After that, he lived with his father and disappeared from the map. It's said that the kid was homeschooled. But then, 1 year later, a fire happened in Deku. says that the father wasn't at home at the moment, and no one knows what caused it. But a single body was found, too burned to be recognized, but judging by the size, it was declared Midroriya Izuku. After that, the father moved to another house. There's something strange with this case. Shouta's guts are screaming at him. The Midoriyas are, at the moment, Shouta's best led, both for the vigilante and the eye burner. Still, Shouta will focus for now on keeping building trust with the kid. Hopefully, 2 years are enough for the kid to tell him the truth. Chapter 5 in early July, a year after the conversation about the eye burner, Shouta knew his time was running out. But he still didn't have enough to know who the serial killer really was. His investigations into the Midoriyas did not bear much fruit either. Without a valid reason, Shouta cannot reopen the investigation into the child's death. And unfortunately, there is not a single mark on his Sashi's name to justify an investigation. Shouta has not yet confirmed with the problem child, but he is 90% sure that the little vigilante is Midroriya Izuku. Probably stress and trauma caused a forced manifestation of his quirk. The personality disorder likely has the same cause. The point is Shouta will meet the kid today as usual. And he is debating with himself whether he should bring up the case. To his misfortune, the kid beat him to it. Hey Eraserhead. Oh great, Ifrit is always harder to talk to. It's like Shouta is always walking on eggshells with him. I can hear the gears on your head from the other building. What's on your mind? You? Shouta replied before thinking. Me? Poltergeist. Both. Ifrit asked, smirking. Both. Shouta replied. The absence of his usual sarcastic remark made Ifrit drop his smirk, realizing it must be serious. Shouta sighed before continuing. You know, my offer still stands. I meant what I said. I'm sure you meant. Ifrit sighed, closing his eyes. But still. Shouta already brought this up a few times. The offer to adopt the kid. The first time he offered, Ifrit laughed as if it was the funniest thing he had ever heard in his life. Shouta simply dropped it at the time. But after the third offer, he knew Shouta was serious. To Shouta's surprise, the one who denied it was Poltergeist. Putting in the kid's words, you don't know who we are. If you knew it, I'm sure you wouldn't want us. Shouta tried many times to assure the kid he didn't care who the kid was, but it was useless. Shouta still brought the offer a few times, but the kid never accepted. A few more days. 2 weeks at most. Poltergeist snapped Shouta at his thoughts. After that, if you still accept us. Shouta didn't need an explanation to know what the kid was talking about. It was time for the kid's plan. He'll go after the eye burner. Problem child. Shouta called softly. As I said before, I wouldn't stop you. But, would this help your investigation? The kid interrupted Shouta, pulling a portable camera from under his cloak. We've been debating it, and we want you to have it. Shouta took the camera and started looking through it. The first image was of the house. The second one had a focus on the house number. The third one had the street name. The fourth photo was a hand-drawn map, showing a house with 5 rooms, a living room, a kitchen, 3 bedrooms, and a bathroom, probably the house in the photos. The fifth image was inside the house. It looked like a perfectly normal house. One would think that at least 3 people lived there. He lives alone. Never married again. Shouta heard Ifrit say. Sometimes, I wonder if he really loved her. Shouta kept scanning through the pictures, detailing the house's layout, until he stopped on the first suspicious thing. The photo of an open drawer, several surgical instruments stored in it. Certainly not in the right condition. The next photo had a closed door, with too many locks on it. 5 locks and 3 padlocks. Shouta watched the details for a few seconds, but just before moving on to the next one, he felt a tug on his scarf. He saw the kid looking at him with a troubled look on his face. The next ones are disturbing. Poltergeist said worriedly. Shouta saw many disturbing things in his life, but he had to admit it. The kid was right. The next few photos are disturbing. The photos, which Shouta assumed belonged to the room with the locked door, showed several jars arranged on shelves like pickle jars. But what the jars contained were eyes, specifically green eyes. Like all the others, the photos showed various details, including close-ups showing the jars up close, and the labels with the victims' names on them. The last photo was of a jar separated from the others. This jar was labeled Midroriya Izuku. When Shouta looked at the child again, he saw tears falling from his blue eye. The yellow eye was not crying, but he seemed no less troubled by the memory. Putting the camera aside for a moment, Shouta knelt in front of the kid and wrapped him in a hug. The kid buried his head in Shouta's scarf, and he could hear his sobs. Midoriya Hasashi. Ifrit said, full of venom. That's his name. Th that he know enough. Poltergeist stuttered. See Circa can you? I can. Shouta replied. Thank you for trusting me, kid. He added a few seconds later. We'll catch him, I promise you. They stood like that for a few more minutes, until Shouta noticed the child's breathing quietening and the hiccup stopping. Then the kid pulled out of a hug. This time both his eyes were yellow. He was already exhausted. Ifrit explained. We've been discussing this for a few days. And I know he didn't sleep last night. I'll have to make a few calls. Shouta said, getting up. but 2 weeks is enough to prepare a raid. I'll make sure he's caught. Be careful, Eraser. Ifrit said, turning around to leave. I know I don't need to say this, but I would know how dangerous that man is. The next part is barely a whisper. I lived with him. Meet me here again in a week, okay? Shouta said, and the kid nodded. After that, they left. Shouta didn't bother leaving. He immediately got his phone and called Sakauchi. Eraserhead, you never call me. What happened? The eye burner? We got it now. Shouta answered. I'm going there immediately to discuss. But I have in my hands more than enough proofs of his identity. You what? Sakauchi replied. Shouta is sure the man just spat his coffee. Alright, I'll be waiting, don't bother knocking. The door will be unlocked. With that, Shouta hung up and went straight to the police station. When asked about his sources, Shouta simply said he had found a new informant. Sakauchi, who was already involved in the case, and knew about Shouta's relationship with the vigilantes, did not question. The evidence was all there and clearly not edited footage. After much discussion, a few phone calls, and a week to prepare everything, a small team was assembled consisting of Eraserhead, 3 other underground heroes, Sakauchi, and some policemen. A small support team has also been set up to evacuate the neighbors. Hisashi tries to start a fire to use as a smokescreen. The raid's objective is simple. Surround the house and apprehend Midroriya Hisashi. With everything decided, the date for the attack was set for July 15th. The day before the attack, Shouta met with the child once again. He handed a tracker to the child. All he had to do was press the button on it, and Shouta would automatically receive the location. He also made the vigilantes promise not to try to participate in the attack. And after all the preparation, the day of the attack finally arrived. On the night of July 15, Midoriya Hisashi's house was surrounded. The attack began without any problems. The first squad, led by Eraserhead, efficiently broke down the front door and stormed in. The house's layout seemed to be exactly like the map the kid made, but no one inside. Eraserhead went for the first room while another hero checked the kitchen. Clear, he said after checking it. Clear. Another one yelled. Clear. Came from the kitchen. Clear. From the main bedroom. The only one left was the locked room. Even knowing what was there, Eraserhead was already dreading what he would find. Password. You're in. Eraserhead said to the other hero. Password. His quirk was a minor telekinesis, 2 meters radius. Practically useless in combat, but perfect for opening any lock. The hero himself is also one of the greatest proofs that a hero should not be judged by his quirk. On it, putting his hand above the locks, they started opening one by one. After opening it, Eraserhead was quick to kick the door and jump inside, Erasure already activated and scanning the room. Again, it was just like the kid's photo, tens of jars with green eyes floating around. But again, no one was inside. Clear. Eraserhead announced deactivating Erasure. Damn, where is he? A few minutes later, the entire squadron was tearing the house apart, looking for clues. The jars were all secured as evidence, as were the medical instruments. The house is obviously the right one. All the evidence against the eye burner is there, but no sign of Midoriya Hisashi. He should be here. There's no way he could have learned about the attack unless he had a source in the police. But even if he had, the raid was kept secret from everyone who was not participating in it. No, he was in the house, but somehow he managed to escape. The only way this could have happened would be looking at the display stand in the center of the room, where Midoriya Inko's eyes were. Eraserhead saw a carpet. He kicked the display and examined it. Son of A, he called his squad. A trapdoor, he must have escaped through. Looking inside, he found a long tunnel. It was impossible to tell where it would come out, but it was clearly straight to the end. Password, with me, we will check the tunnel. The rest follow our signal from the surface. After a few nods, Eraserhead jumped down and started following the tunnel, careful of any possible ambushes. About probably halfway through the tunnel, Eraserhead received another signal, but this one wasn't from anyone on his squad, and he knew exactly who it was from. Damn it. Let's hurry. Eraserhead yelled and started running. Password followed him in shock. He had never seen Eraserhead lose his composure like this. But how could Shouta not lose his composure? Because this signal came from the tracker, Shouta left with the kid. And receiving this signal today can only mean a single thing. The kid is facing the eye burner and probably alone against him. Shouta never ran that fast in all his life. Chapter 6 Izuku is many things. Vigilante, trouble magnet, trauma box, walking museum and scars, to name a few. However, a liar is not one of them. So when they promised his dad Eraserhead that they would not try to participate in the attack on Hisashi's house, they did indeed keep their promise. However, there was no way they wouldn't watch closely. Eraserhead probably knew that, so he didn't make them promise to stay away, just not to participate. When the attack started, Izuku was there watching everything while hiding nearby. However, after a few minutes, when there was no sign of conflict, Kuzu began to get a bad feeling. Until everything clicked, there is no way Hisashi never prepared for a situation like that. The house probably had a hidden escape route prepared. The only thing that stopped Izuku from having a breakdown right there, because how could he have let something so simple go by? This way Hisashi will run away again, and it's his fault. Was Kuzu already starting to run behind the house, still careful to stay away from the police and heroes nearby? Surprisingly, it was not that difficult to find the traces of an underground passage. If they had been looking for it, the heroes would probably have found it by now. Looking at the direction of the trail, Izuku deduced that it would lead to the construction site a few blocks away, and immediately began to fly there, praying that he was right because if not, Hisashi would surely have escaped. Izuku arrived at the place just in time to notice something moving on the ground and hide. They saw a hidden trapdoor open, and a very familiar figure came out from inside. Midroriya Hisashi. The man in question got out of the trapdoor, closed it, and covered it with some cement bags, then dusted himself and started walking away. Well, it's all or nothing now. Izuku and Kuzu have spent 3 years waiting for the day when they would meet this man again. And now is the time. Thus is revenge. Izuku sat cross-legged on a nearby scaffolding and took off their shoes. They wouldn't survive this battle. Then called the man monster. Hisashi. Hisashi turned at him, and seeing the skull mask, he grinned. Oh? The famous vigilante came for me? He asked. I feel so loved today. You won't be grinning for long. Kuzu said, then threw his mask away. They want the man monster to know who they are. Rat. How? Hisashi asked, then looked at his eyes and saw one blue and one yellow. Your eyes. The only thing worth you had. And you lost it. Shut up. You won't escape again, Hisashi. Kuzu yelled at him. They pulled the tracker Eraserhead gave them from his cloak and pressed the button. Let's hope he arrives on time. Calling help. The monster provoked. You're still the same crybaby. Oh, no Hisashi. You don't get it. Kuzu said. The backup is not to save us. Izuku said in a low tone. It's to save you. Kuzu completed before jumping down in front of Hisashi and discarding his cloak. Hisashi looked at his face for a moment and took a step back. Izuku's face was perfectly split into two expressions. His left side had a sad expression, but had a smile on his face, and tears coming from his blue eye. His right side had a feral grin, the yellow eye sparkling in anticipation. It was like looking at two different persons at the same time. Prepare yourself, Hisashi. They said in unison. Today, we bring justice, vengeance stuff. Saying that, Kuzu threw the tracker at Hisashi's face, aiming at the eyes. Hisashi threw a hand in front of his face to block the projectile, but that was exactly what Kuzu was aiming for. The moment Hisashi lowered his arms, Kuzu was already in front of him, drop-kicking him in the chest, both feet glowing with green flames. The monster's eye widened at the attack, and he took a few steps back trying to recover his breath, then opened his mouth and threw a flame wave at the kid, who took it head-on. Hisashi grinned and was about to taunt the kid, when he felt a kick to his chin, falling to the floor. He looked at the, now doing a handstand with his leg, outstretched in a kick, kid who didn't look fazed by his burning clothes, and the small burns on his face. What was that? You should be quirkless. Hisashi screamed, but then felt a chain wrap around his legs. We should also be dead. But we aren't. Izuku said, with his hands stretched and the chains dancing in his arms. He pulled on the chains, knocking Hisashi to the ground and pulling him close. But Hisashi was tougher than he looked. He opened his mouth again and aimed his flames on the chains, which soon started to melt by the heat. You damn rat. Hisashi yelled again, as he stood up. When I am done with you, you will wish you had died in the dark alley you crawled through to get away from me. Izuku didn't reply anymore. Instead, Kuzu summoned his flames again, this time even hotter, the yellow flames glowing even brighter than the green ones. He went to Hisashi again and punched him in the arm. The fire burned straight through his sleeve and left a first-degree burn on his upper arm. Seeing that, Kuzu smiled. He wouldn't suffer any burn unless he spends 10 minutes holding his yellow flames. This means that Hisashi's fire resistance is weaker than his own. It makes sense, for as hot as Hisashi's flames are, they aren't even close to Kuzu's. Let's up the heat a bit more. Kuzu said, holding both of Hisashi's arms and summoning his flames again, this time bright blue. Hisashi's eyes widened when he started feeling his skin burning. So, Hisashi. How does it feel to be burned? Then he opened his mouth and breathed a, just as bright blue, fire wave on the man's face, who started screaming in pain. What's the problem? Didn't you do the same to Mom? He asked, throwing another punch in his chin. Then, Izuku held him with his telekinesis, and threw him up before flying after him. This is Mom's quirk, Izuku said, looking the monster in the eyes. He held Hisashi in place, keeping his mouth shut. I couldn't have asked for a better quirk. Then he dropped Hisashi, looking at his hands, then at the man falling to the ground again. Izuku started remembering everything the man did to him. Kuzu felt his anger spiking. Izuku felt only sadness for what the man had become. But both emotions were at their maximum. Looking at his right hand, Kuzu called on his flames once more. This time, they were bright purple. This has already gone too far. Kuzu said and heard Zuku humming in agreement. Alright, let's put an end to this. Then Zuku let go of his telekinesis, and they dropped after Hisashi, already aiming their knees at his chest. Shouta found another trapdoor at the end of the tunnel, no doubt leading out. He tried opening it, but there was something heavy holding it down. Damn it, Shouta doesn't have time to waste with this. His kid, is facing a villain and serial killer right at this moment. Shouta needs to get there before it's too late. Shouta started punching the door, but it didn't budge. What the heck is holding this thing? Damn it, why doesn't Shouta carry explosives with him? He heard a panting sound behind him. That's right, password is with him. He's a professional at that. Explosives. Do you have it? He asked. The hero gave him a skeptical look. Hurry up. I need to get up there now. This was enough to convince the other hero. He gave Shouta a small stick explosive cluster and a detonator. Shouta didn't waste any time sticking it to the trapdoor, and taking a few steps back less than he should, he pressed the detonator. As soon as moonlight came through a cloud of dust, Shouta climbed out of the tunnel, leaving a coughing password behind him. Leaving the tunnel, Shouta immediately started looking for the kid. Poltergeist, Ifrit. He started screaming for them. Where are you, kid? Shouta was searching frantically when he saw a shadow right above him. He saw someone falling when he looked up and barely had time to dodge. When he looked at the man on the floor, his eyes widened. This was Midroriya Hisashi. He was completely beaten and full of burnings. He probably had broken bones, if not from the fight, from the fall he just took. The man looked at Shouta and raised his hand. Hisashi didn't have time to finish his sentence before someone landed on his stomach with both knees. Shouta had to hide his face from the impact, but when he looked, he saw a mop of green hair, a face covered in freckles, upper chest exposed because of his burned clothes, but besides that, the kid only had minor burns in his body. Shouta's eyes lingered on the many scars on the kid's chest for a moment, but then looked up and saw a teary blue and an angry yellow eye. There's no doubt about who the kid is. This is Ifrit and Poltergeist. Midroriya Izuku. The kid grabbed the man by the collar of his shirt and brought his face closer, then he raised his right hand, which was glowing a bright purple from his flames, and started bringing it down to the man's face. Kid. Shouta said, and the kid's hand stopped just an inch from the man's face. The kid looked up and saw Shouta, then looked once more at the man's face, then at his hands, and dropped the man back to the floor. The man hit his head on the floor with a loud thud. Hisashi wasn't conscious anymore. The purple glow on the kid's hand slowly dimmed. Eraserhead said. He heard the kid's voice as the kid looked at him again. He didn't look sad or angry anymore, only lost. Does he deserve to live? Poltergeist asked him. He looked at the man one more time and brought his left arm above his eyes. After everything he did, why shouldn't I pluck his eyes out, as he did to Mom? Then the kid grabbed his collar again and brought him closer. Shouta saw a purple glow on his throat as he started talking again. Shouta said. Ifrit said. Why shouldn't I burn him alive, as he did to Mom? As he did so many times to Zoo. Then the kid looked Shouta in the eyes and asked. Why, Dad? Why does this man get to live, but not Mom? And this question almost broke Shouta's heart. How is he supposed to answer this? Shouta's answer will be what decides if this kid will dirt his hands with blood or not. Does Hisashi deserve to live? Frankly, probably not. And even if he does live, the man will be forever locked in Tartarus. But this kid, his kid, shouldn't have this monster's blood on his hands. Izuku, Shouta said, and the kid looked at him in shock, then brought a hand to his face, apparently remembering that he wasn't wearing a mask. Maybe this man deserves to die. Maybe he doesn't. But one thing you can be certain of. I won't love any less regardless of your decision. And these must have been the right words because the kid drops the man again and jumps at Shouta, hugging him and sobbing uncontrollably. When the rest of the squad arrived, Shouta simply gestured to the unconscious man on the floor, and asked for an ambulance to check on the kid. Shouta can't see the kid has at least a third-degree burn on his right hand, but he might have other burns. Well guys, that is it for now. Make sure to like and subscribe and join the Discord. See you guys later.